He said what he wanted was to defend newcomers to the lists. We are going to say to the newcomers, it depends upon your genius, upon your initiative. But what we are going to see is that no man uses any means except brains and a better business capacity than yours to beat you. Roosevelt's aspersions on Wilson's progressivism provided more grist for Wilson's mill. On his second campaign tour, he explicitly rejected Thomas Jefferson's limited government views and threw Roosevelt's accusations back in his face. Because we don't take the dictum of a leader who thinks that he knows exactly what ought to be done by everybody, we are accused of wishing to minimize the powers of the government of the United States. I am not afraid of the utmost exercise of the powers of the government of Pennsylvania, or of the Union, provided they are exercised with patriotism and intelligence and really in the interest of the people who are living under them. He also inferred, I feel confident that if Jefferson had lived in our own day, he would see what we see. But the individual is caught in a great confused nexus of all kinds of complicated circumstances, and that to leave him alone, to leave him helpless, is against the obstacles with which he has to contend, and therefore law in our day must come to the assistance of the individual. Wilson on these tours also had another meeting with Brandeis and asked Brandeis to give him some fresh proposals for dealing with the trusts. Brandeis obliged with a legislative program that included removing uncertainties in the current antitrust law, establishing an agency to aid in the enforcement, and spelling out prohibited practices and remedies for those prohibited practices. Wilson revealed Brandeis' influence when he announced, there is a point of bigness, as every businessman in this country knows, though some will not admit it, where you pass the point of efficiency to get to the point of clumsiness and unwieldiness. Wilson was hitting his stride as a campaigner. In the first half of October, he made his longest and most intensive tour. It was a 9-day barnstorming trip that took him as far west as Colorado. Neither candidate, by the way, got to the West Coast. Train travel then was just too time-consuming. In 1916, Wilson's opponent, Charles Evans Hughes, would get to the West Coast. Something of a fiasco there, but that's another story. Speaking in Indianapolis, Wilson coined his own great slogan when he urged people to organize the forces of liberty in our time to make conquest of a new freedom. People had a choice. They could either submit to legalized monopoly or else open the fields of competition so that new men with brains, new men with capital, new men with energy in their veins, may build up enterprises in America. He also said, he poked fun at himself. He said, people have regarded me as a very remote academic person. They don't know how much human nature there is in me to give me trouble in my life. They particularly like the enthusiasm of the plain sort of men when they approach me. When they call me kid or witty and all the rest of it, I know I'm all right. Wilson really, I mean, he's the better man. That's just what comes out of this. He became relentless in attacking Roosevelt and trying to undercut his defeat. He always called his party, Roosevelt's progressives, he called them the third party, or the new party, or the irregular, the variegated Republicans. He never called them the progressives. I'm not going to concede that title to them. At one point, he recited the famous rhyme about the purple cow. Say about his opponent, about the saviors of society, I feel the same way. I never saw one, never hope to see one, but I'll tell you, I would rather see one than be one. Now, Wilson wasn't entirely negative. For example, in Lincoln's hometown, Springfield, Illinois, he appealed to the memories of the great emancipator. We are going to repudiate all monopolistic slavery as emphatically as we repudiated the other. Now, these oratorical efforts came at a cost. Wilson strained his voice on this October campaign swing. Well, Roosevelt was suffering from the same thing, a strained voice. He had kept up a grueling campaign swing, and he hammered away at his messages of trust regulation, and strong government. Unfortunately, what he didn't talk about was his basic message of transcendent nationalism to overcome class division. And frankly, I think the reason he did it was because Wilson had put him on the defensive. Speaking in a cracking voice in Chicago on October 12th, Roosevelt maintained, I'm not for monopoly when we can help it. We intend to restore competition. We intend to do away with the conditions that make for monopoly. But breaking up some trust wouldn't lower prices, wouldn't improve working conditions. Free competition and monopoly, they're all the same thing unless you improve the condition of workers. What I am interested in is getting the hand of government put on all of them. This is what I want. Later on, he issued a statement in which he endorsed strengthening the antitrust laws very similar ways to what Brandeis suggested to Wilson. Well, both the candidates got relief from their strained voices in, frankly, a twisted way. On October 14, 1912, here's a Wisconsin reference, and some people will say it's almost ironic and typical of Wisconsin. In Milwaukee, a mentally deranged bartender tried to assassinate Roosevelt by shooting him in the chest. Now, it was Roosevelt's practice of preparing his speeches in advance. By the way, this is different. Roosevelt would write his speeches out in advance. Wilson liked to speak. Not quite off the cuff, but he could really speak with very, very few notes. Well, Roosevelt's practice of writing the speeches out in advance helped save his life. The manuscript of his speech and his steel-reinforced glasses case inside his jacket pocket, those absorbed most of the impact of the bullet. Now, true to form, Roosevelt insisted on going ahead with the speech. He got there, he informed his audience that he'd just been wounded. He said, I have altogether two important things to think about to feel any concern over my own death. And now I cannot speak to you insincerely within 5 minutes of being shot. He said this incident showed the need to prevent the coming of the day when we shall see in this country two recognized creeds fighting against one another, when we shall see the creed of the haves arraigned against the creed of the have-nots. When that day comes, such incidents as this tonight will become commonplace in our history. He likened his present political crusade to when he led his troops in the Spanish-American War, and he avowed, I never in my life was in any movement in which I was able to serve with such wholehearted devotion as in this, in which I was able to feel as I do this common weal. I have fought for the good of our common country. He should have stopped there. Those lines read like a dying declaration. And some historians have speculated that Roosevelt was actually disappointed that he didn't die after uttering those words. What an accident. No, instead, he kept on talking, and he grew incoherent from shock and loss of blood as he attacked Wilson again as a sham progressive, still devoted to the old flintlock, muzzle-loaded states' rights doctrine. Finally, his supporters had to leave off the stage, and that was that. He spent several days in a Chicago hospital, and then he went home to Oyster Bay on Long Island to recuperate for another 2 weeks. He made announcements from his hospital bed and from home. He gave one more speech at an election eve rally at Madison Square Garden. But for all practical purposes, that assassination attempt ended Roosevelt's campaign. Wilson responded with a gesture that was both generous and shrewd. He announced that he would suspend his campaign as soon as possible. Nice gesture, very nice gesture. Also, frankly, gave him a chance to get some rest and recuperation. Wilson's last speeches really showed him at his best. At one point, he saluted Roosevelt as that gallant gentleman who had done so much to wake up the country the problems that now have to be settled. He also revived an earlier catchphrase when he called for a body of laws which will look after the men who are on the make rather than the men who are already made. The hope of the United States in the present time and the future is the same as it has always been. It is in the hope and confidence that out of unknown homes will come those who will constitute themselves the masters of industry and politics. The average homeowners, the average wealth, the average enterprises, the average initiative of the United States is the only thing that makes the nation. I think his most telling remarks came when he affirmed, I don't believe in a government that depends on the ability of a few individuals. If I am fit to be your president, it is only because I understand you. And if I do not understand you, I am not fit. If I am not expressing in this speech tonight the aspirations of the men who sit before me, I beg that you will not vote for me. I do not wish to be your master. I wish to be your spokesman. He also reiterated, every country is renewed out of the middle stratum. For energy in a nation is like sap in a tree. It rises from the bottom up. He also asserted, we do not want a big brother government. I do not want a government that will take care of me. I want a government that will make other men take their hands off so that I can take care of myself. He also declared, the average man indeed. Where did all of us come from except from the ranks of average men? There isn't a class in America so high that men haven't climbed into it from the bottom, if there is any bottom. And he cited the example of Lincoln. That's the pride of America. And if out of the average men we can't get our great men, then we have destroyed the very springs of renewal in this America, which we built to show that every man born in every class has the right and privilege to make the most of himself. When the election returns came in, they gave Wilson reason to feel both triumphant and circumspect. He won the popular vote decisively, about 6.3 million votes to Roosevelt's 4.1 and Taft's 3.5. The Electoral College victory was overwhelming. Wilson won 40 states in all regions of the country with a total of 435 electoral votes. Roosevelt won 6 states. California, actually got split. Wilson got 2 electoral votes there too. California, Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, South Dakota, and Washington. He got 88 electoral votes. Taft won only 2 states, Utah and Vermont, for a total of 8 electoral votes. Wilson had nice coattails too. His party shared in the sweep. Democrats won individual governorships. They increased their majority in the House of Representatives, and they picked up 10 Senate seats to win control there for the first time in 18 years. But it wasn't all sweet. Wilson's share of the popular vote was only 42%. He won majorities only in the South and in Maryland. His total vote actually fell about 100,000 short of what the previous Democratic candidate, William Jennings Bryan, had gotten in 1908. In fact, all Wilson and the Democrats did in 1912 was maintain their grip on their normal minority share of the electorate. Well, the returns brought no joy to the opposition either. Roosevelt's second place finish was very impressive. It was and still is the only time a third-party candidate has ever finished ahead of a nominee of a major party. But that was largely a personal victory. Roosevelt ran well ahead of all other progressive candidates. In fact, his cohorts on the ticket did well only on the West Coast. And that bright spot really owed to their having taken over the formerly Republican apparatus in California and also to some extent in Washington. Roosevelt doesn't appear to have attracted new voters. The combined Roosevelt-Taft total in 1912 fell 73,000 votes short of Taft's showing in 1908. All Roosevelt had done was to split the Republicans' normal majority share of the electorate. Taft's third place finish, and carrying only 2 states with very few electoral votes. Those things were personally galling to him. But he could take some comfort in having come in second in 18 states. These included a number in the West. TR is supposed to be the Great Western. He actually came in third in a number of the interior of the Western states. And TR came in third in New York, his home state. Republican candidates in 1912 had also stood firm in the face of the progressives and finished ahead of them in most places despite the weakness at the top of the ticket. The only surprise in the returns is the showing made by the man that the major contenders largely ignored, Debs, the socialist. Debs racked up over 900,000 votes, more than double what he'd gotten in 1908. This was 6% of the vote, and it would stand as the best showing a socialist or any left-wing party candidate would make in American history. Otherwise, without exception of the Debs showing, the results in 1912 actually reflected politics as usual. Question: why? Why did this momentous, exciting campaign produce an unremarkable outcome? I think one reason may have been that the contents of Roosevelt's and Wilson's politics didn't strike many observers as offering much of a contrast. Woman suffrage, that's an issue, but it didn't loom large in the campaign. That was the only one on which Wilson and Roosevelt took clear-cut opposing stance. Theodore Roosevelt was for nationwide women's suffrage. Woodrow Wilson said no, it's to be left to the states. On the 2 issues that did loom large, the trusts and the size and strength of government, it was hard to see where the 2 men differed. Wilson talked about big business and trusts. Roosevelt talked about good trusts and bad trusts. Both of them would leave the first alone and break up the second. If monopoly became unavoidable in the industry, they both held out nationalization as a possible last resort. Roosevelt's attacks on Wilson's governmental views fell flat, but not because, as Roosevelt liked to charge that Wilson was an adroit speaker who could twist arguments. Those charges fell flat because they just weren't true. Both men had admired Alexander Hamilton since their youth, and neither one could top the other in admiration for strong, centralized, activist, interventionist government. 12 years later, the journalist William Allen White rendered the most widely accepted judgment in the 1912 campaign. Between the new nationalism and the new freedom was that fantastic imaginary gulf that has always existed between Tweedledum and Tweedledee. This perceived lack of difference explained a lot of voter inertia. Roosevelt and Wilson have both tried to chip away at the other's support. Well, with both of them taking the same stands on these main issues, why cross party lines? I think particularly those attacks, Roosevelt's attacks on Wilson as a state rights Democrat, may have in some ways unwittingly reinforced tendencies for both sides to stay put. Remember, 1912 was less than 50 years after the end of the Civil War. Union and Confederate veterans were still serving in Congress and in the Supreme Court. Conversely, though pejorative, Wilson's characterization of the progressives as irregular Republicans was apt. Their nominee was appealing to memories and prejudices that they had brought with them from their previous party. And those memories and prejudices threw up a pretty formidable obstacle to any future effort by Wilson to build a majority coalition and to get reelected against an undivided opposition. Now, this Republican split really cast a shadow over the Democrats and their victory. A question haunted them. Still haunted them. Historians still argue about this. Could Wilson have beaten Roosevelt in a 2-person race? Nobody doubted that he would have crossed Taft. But just about every observer then and afterward has assumed that he would have lost to Roosevelt. After all, Wilson himself talked about it. Ex-president had a huge popularity, and his impressive second-place finish reinforced that view. But